So I'm guessing most of you have some sense of why it's important to understand your mind, to understand consciousness. Hopefully, through this series of 8 classes, you'll more deeply increase that understanding of what the mind is and why it's important to understand, why it's important for our well-being, our happiness, for a good life. So that's kind of what we'll be addressing in this first session today. We'll just be talking about kind of an introduction to mind. What is consciousness? Is it really a mystery? And why is it important to know? So we have this time for tonight set, or this morning, wherever you are, set for an hour. If people at the end of the hour have any questions, right, or if you have any comments or want to share a little bit, discuss a little bit, then I'd be able to stay on for that as well. But I probably won't be taking questions during the first hour here, okay? I might actually ask you some questions to either think about or even, actually asking for someone to, give some response. But at least in general, we're going to kind of move through the material and see how that goes. Thank you for having your videos on, so I can kind of tell if someone's completely lost, if what I'm saying isn't making any sense at all. Then I'll see confused expressions and I'll know that I have to ask what's not making sense. Okay, so the first thing we do now, I don't know many of you. I know a few of you, and it's wonderful to see those friends, old friends of mine that I've known for some of you many years. And for those of you who are not known to me, I'm not going to assume that you have a Buddhist practice or that you've studied Buddhism before. So we're not going to do kind of traditionally recited prayers that often are done at the outset of a teaching or a class. We'll just do a kind of general motivation. And if you have prayers that you generally do, if you're in the habit of doing a refuge or bodhicitta prayer, feel free to go ahead and do that on your own, okay, while we're in silence for a couple minutes. So the main thing with setting a motivation, again, we're here learning about the mind. Well, the motivation is what sort of allows any activity you do to create, well, it determines the kind of result that your activities will create. The motivation's in the mind. The activities could be a mix of mental, physical, verbal activity, right? Listening, right? Using your, as you're listening, being attentive, using concentration, using your analytical capacity, all these things, right? Active listening, that's all an action, okay? So sitting, even though we're sitting here, we're not doing much physically, that's still action, mental action, right? So when we do an action, it's going to bring a result. Okay, now we don't have to go right now, jump in headfirst into this notion of karma, but I'm sure everyone's at least heard of it. But the point here is that at the outset of an action, to make it the most valuable, the best thing we can do is to make our motivation the most broad, the most expansive, right? Including all people, right? And even non-humans, right? Why not? Meaning, instead of just doing this thing just so I can, learn something kind of cool, or, be able to say, oh, I learned about Buddhist psychology, so that, you put another check on your to-do list or on your credentials, right? Or even, to do something that could be valuable for your career, right? For your financial well-being. Instead of thinking of those things, we think about instead, then why are we here in this class? So we can learn something, but learn something for the long-term purpose of genuinely being able to sort of evolve our minds into a mind that's more loving, more caring, more able to actually serve others in a true way, in a meaningful and true way. Okay, good. So then we'll take just 2 minutes. You can close your eyes, you can leave them open, that's up to you, and think, may I learn something so that I can genuinely improve my mind, my wisdom, my compassion, my ability to serve others in this world, and to just be able to benefit all living beings. Okay, very good. I think our motivations, they look pretty pure from what I can see. Okay, so here we are. I'm gonna do a bit of, I have a little bit of a slideshow, some slides, and we'll look through it. I can send them after the talk and put them up on the website. I just don't want people to get too distracted by it if I send it now, so I'll just do a screen share. Okay, where do we begin? Well, with the question that's the title of the class: is consciousness a mystery? So this is something that you might hear people say, and I've heard it many, many times if you read about or listen to, well, scientists of a variety of stripes, even people in the fields of philosophy of mind, neuroscience, psychology, but also physicists, biologists, people who are generally thinkers and are interested in consciousness. I'm talking about, of course, people sort of with an academic or scientific background from the Western tradition of intellectual tradition. And people very frequently say this: consciousness is a mystery. It's the sort of the last frontier, right? The last thing we have to crack. Okay. Some of the questions that come up with that, and we'll go a little bit into detail, not much later on, but just for this introduction. A lot of the times the question is basically, how does this experience, this subjective awareness experience, arise from the physiology of the body and brain, of the neurobiology of our physical instantiations, right? And there's so many other questions related to that, right? In terms of specifically identifying the neural correlates with consciousness and trying to figure out exactly which brain states equate to which states of consciousness. I'm going to just say for this introduction that this is not really considered to be that important a question when it comes to, well, from the Buddhist perspective. But why? Because when it comes to really the first thing that we have that we're able to do by learning about our consciousness, which is changing it to become happier, to actually work with our consciousness. In other words, we don't necessarily need the technology of neuroimaging to develop an internal technology or techniques, really, of becoming an observer of your mind, right? An objective observer of your own mind in a way that allows you to notice when there are mental states that are causing you suffering, when there are mental states that are projecting, right, onto other people, onto situations in ways that make us act harmfully, that just make us internally frustrated, maybe intensely craving, maybe just any number of states of discomfort, right? Lack of peace. So this is the entirety of the Buddhist tradition going back 2,500 years, and it's deep and intense exploration of consciousness and the mind is all for this purpose of learning to discipline your own mind, right? In other words, understand it, see it, transform it, mold it into something that's more workable for your own well-being, for your own good life. Does that make sense? I'm not saying those other questions, what they call, right, the hard problem of consciousness, etc. I'm not saying those are like unimportant, okay? It's not the most important in terms of what's going to be of direct value in your own life. Okay, so this is now something that I just wanted to put out there as a general kind of approach, right? An approach to your study. It should be your approach to the study of everything, but luckily for us, the Buddha himself said it, and he was so open-minded, right? So aware of different people's psychology, different people's inclinations, the need for people to come to something slowly, gradually, to develop their perspective, their wisdom over time. So what did he say? My followers, monks, scholars, perform careful analysis and experiment regarding my words, like a goldsmith assaying gold, through burning, cutting, and rubbing it. My words are not to be accepted merely out of respect or faith in me. Okay, so this is, of course, now if you're in the sort of camp of people who considers Buddhism to be a religion, personally, I don't. It's fine if you do. I certainly acknowledge that it has a religious component. Anyway, separate discussion, but even if you call it a religion, you can see how deeply embedded in empiricism that the tradition really is, right? Empiricism and logic and reasoning. So don't just accept words. This is not a dogma. Okay, don't accept just because the teacher said it. Don't call it God's word and say that you have to have faith in it or else, right? Absolutely not. It's the opposite. Okay, analyze everything. There's a joke actually here in my monastery. I live in a monastery called Sera. It's relocated in South India. It was actually founded in Tibet in 1619. We had our 400th anniversary a few years ago. No, 1419, 600. I reversed that. It was founded in 1419. We had our 600th anniversary a few years ago. There you go. And but that was of course in Tibet, and so now the current place where I am in South India is reestablished after the Tibetans came into exile, or many of them came into exile in 1959. Anyway, we have kind of a joke. It's a saying, kind of, but it's a joke, but it's half joking joke, right? So we say, people, you come to Sera, you come to the monastery with a lot of faith and energy to learn and practice Buddhism, and then when you're there, you lose your faith. and it's because of this approach, right? Where maybe you and it's kind of said facetiously, but it's like a stage you go through. It's like you lose your faith that was blind faith, right? That was just, yeah, okay, this is what the Buddha said the consciousness is about. This is what Buddha said about the rebirth, or the different types of existence you can be born into, and oh yeah, of course I accept because I'm a Buddhist, or I like Buddha, or whatever. You completely have to wash away that way of thinking, right? And instead, through analysis, through, when we say experimentation here, it doesn't mean like you create a physical experimental design, like you're doing the double slit experiment, or like you're, any actual physical experiment. It means kind of testing things out by taking the logical consequence. Like if you say that this exists, or this is the way it is, then what are the logical consequences of that? And that's why we actually practice debate as part of our pedagogy, our learning methodology here in all Tibetan monasteries. It's a one-on-one kind of debate method. It's very nice. I won't go into detail about it, but anyway, that was just part of this, part of this introduction, just really emphasizing to everyone that this is for you. Okay, the point of all this is for you to get something that's going to be beneficial, right? Something that you can take into your life, where you can go back after this class, sit down before you go to, or if it's early for you, as you start your day, before you go to sleep, and think about something in a way that's going to bring you joy. It's going to make your mind feel peaceful, and it's going to actually, give you a new tool, something that you can use, right? Something you can use for your deeper awareness, greater happiness. Okay, enough with the introduction. Let's get going. So why learn about consciousness? Why learn about consciousness? Essentially, for happiness. Happiness is the motivation of our mind training practice, of our Buddhist study of psychology. Okay, and again, in this tradition, study of psychology in the Western tradition might not be with the motivation of happiness. But what is happiness then? It's also just the motivation for life in general. Again, there are mixed motivations. Not that everyone wakes up every morning and thinks to themselves, oh, I'm a human being, I'm alive, happiness is the purpose of my life, so I'm going to really plan my life out very carefully, every action, in order to maximize happiness. We don't think about it that way, but that's what's underlying our thinking, right? That's what's underlying our thinking. The problem is What's our problem? Who knows what the problem is? Raise your hand. Anyone? If you raise your hand, I can call on you and unmute you. Who knows what the problem is? So we all are motivated by this wish to have happiness. Well, but then the question, but are we always happy? Clearly not. I mean, if yes, then you please teach the class because you've become enlightened. So why? What's the problem? Why are we not always happy, even though that's what's motivating us? Any hands? Okay, Norbu asked. I think this is how you do it.
Lorla was first.
Oh, Laurel.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There you go.
I actually did not raise my hand, but I think it's because of suffering, that life is suffering. So we're not happy.
Well, that's a powerful statement. Life is suffering, so we're not happy. Well, that's another possibility. Suffering, when we're not happy, right? What is there instead? It's either some kind of neutral, kind of non-feeling feeling, right? Basically, or suffering, some kind of unpleasant feeling, unpleasant affect, or suffering, right? But not all of life is suffering, right? What would be the problem if we said that just life is suffering? The problem with that would be, well, there would be no happiness. I mean, if life was suffering, we're alive, we have life, whereas then it's all suffering, there'd be no happiness. Now, when the Buddha taught about the Four Noble Truths and the true sufferings, right? He wasn't talking about suffering. He was talking about true suffering, which is being in a state where there's still a potential for suffering, where there's a potential for suffering. So that's what I'm actually getting to. The reason that we're not always happy, the reason that we still have potential for suffering is because we have an ignorance about how to create happiness. It's as simple as that. We don't understand fully how happiness is created. I saw a hand though. Was it Eric? Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yeah, it's the mental afflictions and the contaminated karmas, but the root of it is the ignorance.
Good. Well, very good. And it's good to have this terminology down, and that's exactly right. But it's also good to, even if you don't have it, we can still recognize in a pretty intuitive way that when, if you, I mean, just say you want to drive to Walmart, whatever, okay? If you don't know how to get there, now these days it's not really a relevant example, but anyway, before we had Google Maps and GPS, if you wanted to go there, but you didn't know how to get there, right? You drive around and around and around. Maybe if you're just really, really lucky, you might wind up there, but very unlikely, right? That's what we're doing, driving around and around in our lives, right? We want happiness, but we really just don't know how to get there. Okay, so what is happiness? Why is understanding the mind going to help us become happier? Well, happiness is part of our minds. Okay, that's simple enough, right? When we talk about happiness, that's something in the mind. Yet there are still two types of it. There's physical happiness and mental happiness. The physical happiness it's still a mental thing. It's just happening within our mental our physical consciousnesses. Physical consciousnesses are still consciousness, their mind, consciousness. Just so you know, as for those of you, again, not familiar with some of this more standard terminology, here in Buddhist psychology, we use these terms interchangeably as sort of equivalent. What terms? Mind, consciousness, awareness, and then even experience. Experience has a little bit broader of connotations, but for now, we can say it. So we can include that. So those four, okay? Mind, consciousness, awareness, and experience, they're referring to the same category of things, of phenomena, these internal subjective states, consciousnesses, okay? So happiness is one, but we have physical happiness and mental happiness. So physical happiness, what's it about? Well, it's happiness that arises through the avenue of our senses. Okay? What kind of examples could people think of? Anyone want to give an example? What is sense-based pleasure? Oh, yeah, Samuel. Yeah.
Physical, sense-based pleasure, good food.
Yes. And not the food, but the feeling, right? The
Right.
affect that arises when you're enjoying the good food. Absolutely.
The taste of food,
The
yeah.
good taste, right? The pleasant taste of food. And that's one that we put so much effort into, right? I mean, wars have been fought, right? For the spices and for coffee and for tea and oh my, I mean, there are probably books written, right? Whole history books about people's search for tastes, for pleasant taste, and what that's resulted in global affairs. Absolutely. It's one of the main things we put effort into in our lives, right? Good taste. Okay. Good taste. And then just go through the 5 senses, right? Beautiful things to see, right? You want a beautiful spouse partner, you want beautiful artwork, you want beautiful Buddha statues, you want right? You want to see beautiful vistas and the trees and the fall colors. Well, now probably too late, but beautiful snowfalls. Okay. Right? Sounds. We want good music. We want to hear pleasant words. We want to hear praise, right? Praise is a funny one because it kind of is on the border between a physical pleasure and a mental pleasure, because the words themselves, like the hearing of the words, can give rise to physical pleasure, but then the meaning of it, that becomes mental pleasure. Then, ooh, they love me, they like me, I'm good, right? That's a mental pleasure. Okay, so good sounds, good, right? Visual forms, pleasant sounds, pleasant smells. Of course, we use our beauty products for pleasant smells, lighting our incense, our scented candles, etc. And also cooking, right? Cooking is similar. It's related with the smell. And then the taste is the next one. And then tactile sensation, right? We want to wear soft, comfortable clothing, not too tight, not too loose, not itchy, not scratchy. We want to have a nice seat, a nice couch, a nice chair, has to support us, has to be just right, right? If we get a little bit cold, we want to turn on the heater, put on the blanket. If we get a little bit hot, we want to turn on the AC, right? Turn on a fan. Constantly. This is our life, right? Looking to satisfy our senses. And then, of course, physical touch, right? Sexual contact, hugs, kisses, etc. Huge amounts of time and energy spent in all those arenas, right? Now, these are the kinds of things which can be gained with the help of wealth and technology, okay? Some people think that technology is an answer to all of the world's problems. But if that were true, then we would see as technology increases, then people would get happier and happier, and the people with the most wealth and the most technology would necessarily be the happiest, right? Clearly not true. Unfortunately, someone with a huge amount of wealth can still be very, very unhappy, right? Mentally. And then, of course, you still end up dying and aging and knowing, I mean, you know, the most powerful people in the world, the current president of the United States, president-elect, they're both about 80 years old. They're not preventing aging and dying with their wealth, right? Or any new technologies. There's a guy who is, you know, I think a billionaire, a CEO, some company who was assassinated a couple of days ago, right? Nothing can prevent death and aging, no matter how good the wealth, how much wealth or how good the technology becomes. And then it doesn't actually directly give us the mental peace, right? Peace of mind. So why? Why doesn't it? Because physical happiness is unstable, it's transient, it depends on the conditions outside of us, but we can't control all the conditions outside of us, right? If our physical happiness depended on being warm, well, what are you going to do when winter comes? I mean, what are you going to do when you lose power and you can't turn the heat on, or it depends on where your heat comes from, of course. You know what I mean? What are you going to do when the conditions outside of you change? And, of course, actually, this is one of the things that wealth and technology enable, right? They enable a greater control over our external environment, sure, greater control. And it does help to create some, right, physical stability, seemingly stable well-being and happiness for at least some time. Okay, so that's very nice, and it's true. Maslow's hierarchy of needs it's there, right? Definitely, I'm not saying that we should completely abandon all physical pleasure. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just talking about what its nature is, right? It's not stable, it's not reliable, but we need a certain degree of physical comfort in order for the mind to focus, right? If we were in abject poverty and our stomachs were so empty that that's all we could think about, we can't come to a class like this and sit comfortably and listen, right? Because all we can think about is food. I'm starving. And that's the state no one should be in, right? No one should have to be in. So yes, we need some physical well-being, right? But we should just call it health, really, right? We need physical health, and external things create that, okay? But ultimately, it's out of our control. And then the final point there in that list is that it is overwhelmed by mental unhappiness, right? So this is the thing. You can have all the good conditions externally, the foods, the house, the beautiful setting, environment, everything like that. But still, right? You're mourning the loss of someone you love. You're hoping to get the new job and so anxious and overwhelmed by your worry and anxiety, right? Your child is starting to get into a bad crowd and you can't stop thinking about it and you don't know what to do. Whatever, right? So many conditions like this where we have this mental unrest, lack of mental peace. So mental happiness then, to the contrary, it takes precedence over physical happiness. So you can be in a case, right, in a state. Now this takes development first, but there are people who first developed their minds through meditation and then lived in a way that was almost like abject poverty, or as a renunciate, just with very, very little food and the most basic kind of sustenance you could imagine, living in caves and so on. And they're still extremely happy, like the happiest people on earth, right? Because the mental happiness that they develop, it overrides any physical unwellness, okay? It is also within our control, right? We can actually decide. Now, not immediately, right? Everything that arises from causes and conditions, which is basically everything we see and experience for the most part, okay? There are some exceptions, but, right? They all depend on a certain collection of conditions to come together. So you can't just say, at a snap of the fingers, oh, now I've learned about that consciousness is this kind of experiential entity, and that about the way I'm thinking about things, and I can change how I think, and that would make me happy. Yes, but not in an instant, right? Because we have conditioning. So you have to practice to recondition your mind. You have to practice to generate greater loving kindness, greater acceptance and tolerance, right? If you get annoyed every time, someone tailgates you when you're driving, well, you have to practice patience and fortitude when you're driving in order to stop getting annoyed. The first time you try, you're going to get annoyed again, but at least you'll be aware. The second time might be a little bit weaker. It'll still be there though, okay? Over time, right? Over months, over years, it will start to genuinely diminish, but it takes a long time, okay? But it's within our control, it just takes time. So it can be developed and strengthened, mental happiness in general, right? It can be made consistent, meaning always, right? Always present. And it does not depend on material wealth or technology. It depends on our thinking, our cognitions, right? The way we appraise different situations, our cognitive appraisals, okay? So that's why understanding the mind is important. Now, how do you understand the mind? How do you know the mind? Okay, this is getting into a little bit of philosophy here. Not too much though. So there are three types of knowable objects that we can talk about in relation to how knowledge of them is gained. Okay, so it's one way of categorizing objects, phenomena, knowable objects, in terms of how we gain knowledge of them. What are the three types? Evident phenomena, slightly hidden phenomena, and three, extremely hidden phenomena. Okay, number one, evident. Those are things that we can just know directly, empirically. We just experience them. Okay, everyone here has a computer or cell phone in front of you, right? You see its color, its shape, its form, the little rectangle, right? You see the screen, all the colors of the faces on the screen, all the light, the LCD. You just see it. You're just experiencing it right there, right? Those are evident phenomena. Okay, evident. We can perceive them directly. Slightly hidden phenomena, number two, slightly hidden phenomena are those which are known indirectly through evidence. Okay, so we have to contemplate, think about, reflect on some kind of evidence in order to gain knowledge of these things. Now, has anyone here, okay, again, show of hands, has anyone here seen an electron before? You know, a single electron? Yes? Can you, Sam, would you like to tell us how or what condition that was in?
You know, in terms of like actually physically seeing what an electron looks like, no. But stuff like near infrared spectrometer, stuff like near infrared spectrometers are based on the concept or based on the theory of electrons, and the actual waveform that it shows you is the electron. It's just a graph of it. So not the direct one, but the actual, but like it wouldn't be there if the electron wasn't there,
Right.
and the energy signatures of the electron wasn't
Perfect.
there.
Thank you for saying it in that way, for explaining what you saw, and that was a very clear explanation, and that's exactly what this is talking about here, right? If there were no electrons, then we wouldn't see these phenomena of, was a spectrometer, is it that you're saying? Or, yeah, a spectrometer, and so many other phenomena that we observe directly. But there's some evidence that we're observing directly, and that's making us have an inference. Oh, because I'm seeing this waveform, there must be this thing of an electron there, right? You're not actually seeing any color and shape of an electron. I mean, they're too small that it would be impossible, literally, because light can't resolve it, right? The only time we can see things is when light can actually like hit it and have something bounce back and be absorbed by your photoreceptors, right, in your eyes. So that's impossible with electrons. They're smaller than light, than the wavelengths of light, right? So you can't actually see it, observe it directly with your senses, right, in this way. But you know it. We can know it. We can know about them. Okay, what's another easy example, maybe more relevant to sort of direct experience, or I mean, experiences that we've maybe had or could imagine having, is, so we all know fire. Everyone knows what fire feels like, looks like. You put your hand near a fire, it's warm. Okay, you see it. It's got orange, red flames, maybe blue. We can see it directly with our senses, with our tactile consciousness, our visual consciousness, right? Both of those things. Okay. Now, what about if you are standing outside of a building? Let's just say there's a house there on Main Street, and you see a bunch of smoke billowing out of the windows of the house. Okay, or even just a chimney. Just say, let's make it less scary. It's billowing out of the chimney. Fine. Okay, so there's smoke billowing out of the chimney. Okay, and you smell the smoke, right? The wood. So what do you immediately know is happening in that house? Yes, let me unmute Terry. Is that Terry? There are two of you, so I'm not sure who's who.
We can infer there's fire from smoke.
Exactly. Very good. You can infer that there is fire because you see the smoke. And it's so quick because we have such a, well-conditioned, deeply conditioned understanding of that cause and effect relationship that you don't even question. Like, it almost seems like you're directly observing the fire. Like, you're so certain of it, right? But you're not, right? You're not directly observing fire. So that's a slightly hidden phenomena. phenomenon in that context, right? We can go inside and then you can see it, feel it directly. But in the context where you're seeing the smoke coming out of the chimney, it's slightly hidden. Now, extremely hidden phenomena. Okay, these things have to be known through a reliable source. That means that you're not in a position to either use evidence to infer it or to observe it directly with one of your with a direct perception. Okay, so things like this, well, we could just use the same example. Is like someone who you're on the phone with, right, across, who's on the other side of the country, okay, and they say, oh, there's such a nice fire in my fireplace right now, right? You have no way to prove that that's true or not. They could be, right, completely, you just have no way to know unless you have a way to confirm the reliability of that person and their statements. Okay, so that's this kind of thing. Now this gets into a very challenging area, and in the Buddhist tradition, this is related especially to the exploration and investigations into karma, right? Because it's something that happens over the span of multiple lifetimes, which of course we can't see, right? We certainly can't see things in another lifetime. And, you know, even through evidence, I mean, there's maybe some general principles that we would be able to infer, but in terms of any specific details, there's no real, you know, evidence that we could use. So anyway, that's just this presentation. Now, why are we talking about this? Well, because which one of these do you think consciousness is? Now, again, I'm talking about, now it could change depending on context, as we've seen. So I'm talking about your consciousness, or even more clearly, like your current consciousness right now of the visual perception of the screen. Which of these three would that be? Any hands? I can't see all of you at once for some reason, so I guess because I'm doing a screen share. Okay. Any hands? Okay, yes, Laurel again. Thank you.
That would be evident.
That would be evident. That would be evident. Okay. Now the question comes. Very good, it's evident. The question comes, but what kind of consciousness is knowing consciousness? Right? I mean, we see things with visual consciousness. We hear them with our auditory, right? Our ear consciousness. We smell them with the olfactory or nose consciousness. We taste the taste with our tongue or gustatory consciousness. And we feel, you know, the solidness, the softness, right? The tactile object with our tactile consciousness, body or tactile consciousness. But what do we know consciousness with? So this is a question that actually different Buddhist philosophical paradigms will give different takes on. But the thing that we can know, so we don't need to go into much detail, but the thing that we can know for sure is that we do experience it, okay? We talked about happiness and suffering, right? Well, how do you know what those are? You experience them. You know what it's like to taste good food. You know what it's like to see smoke, to see fire, to see something beautiful, to see something that you find appalling, or, you know, that is unpleasant. You know these things through your experience. So that's consciousness. But okay, the next point is very important, right? And this is where it starts coming into what we started with about everything should not just be taken, right? I'm saying things that may make sense to you, they might not, right? You might be sitting there going, how do I know I really am experiencing or directly observing my consciousness? I don't believe that. Well, that's good. Don't just take my word for it, right? Analyze and investigate. But this is one way we do that. So what is one way of analyzing and investigating? Well, learning a framework, right, from experts, essentially, right? People who have done research, who have gone in and looked at this kind of phenomena. So mind has many aspects. It has many parts. It has many types. Consciousness is very, very, we can just say consciousness, we can just say the mind, my mind, and then what is the concept that actually is there in your mind? What is there in, you know, your conceptual apparatus when you just say, oh, my mind. My mind is, my mind is a good mind. My mind is a grumpy mind. My mind is something a little bit, well, frankly, a little bit unclear. For me, I can't speak for you. But it's a kind of this like catch-all term that, because our culture is, well, if you're from a Western background, because our culture is so materialistic, right? So focused on the physical. And we don't really understand mind very well. Even psychology, the field purportedly there to investigate the mind, is looking at other people's minds, right? It's not looking at your own mind. So we say the mind, my mind, and it's just this kind of fuzzy, like, I guess the thing that experiences, right? Kind of that thing that's there, it's kind of there in the background that experiences. Okay, that's all, right? But the mind has many aspects, many parts, many types. So talking about, I'm going to investigate the mind, I'm going to understand the mind. It's like talking about, I'm going to try and investigate matter. Okay, what do you mean? I mean, how many different fields are there? Individual separate fields devoted to different types and aspects of matter. Physics, chemistry, right? Within physics, we have quantum mechanics, we have, material science, so that's physics and chemistry. We have biology, we have statistical mechanics, fluid dynamics. I mean, so many kinds of matter, right? So many different things to understand about it. You can't just, it doesn't make sense really to just say, to just think that, oh, I'm going to look, today I'm going to observe my mind. Well, today I'm going to go and research matter. What do you mean? I'm going to do my PhD in matter. Okay. Okay. I mean, I'm again kind of half joking, but it's like a little bit like that. The point is that there's a lot to be learned about the mind, right? It's not quite so simple. So how do we then, like, if we want to observe our minds directly, because we're saying it's an evident phenomenon that we can observe directly, but what else do we need? Well, we need a kind of a framework, and that's what's going to be developed over the next set of classes, right? So today is the introduction, and then we'll start filling in different pieces of this puzzle of mind, of this mystery of mind, hopefully demystifying it as we go. And this is just a couple of examples here. So think about, right, if someone, pops open the hood of your trunk on your car, let's say you have a regular traditional ICE car, internal combustion engine car, and they go, oh, go take out the radiator, go change the alternator, okay? Now, in the case, pretending you don't know anything about mechanics or cars, okay? What are you going to do? You look at there and you just see this big mass of metal and some plastic, right? It's just this, what? Where's the alternator? Right? You go to the mechanic and you have a problem with the car, you go to the mechanic and they look at it, they open the trunk and they go, oh, there's your problem, right? You got a leaking radiator, your timing belt's frayed, about to snap, you got, your battery is dead, they tell you all these things and you have no clue what they're talking about, right? If you don't know about cars. Well, what's the difference between you and the mechanic? They understand the framework, right? They know the individual pieces. So you can look at the same exact thing, right? Your eyes are functioning perfectly well, but you just have no real knowledge, right, of what's there in front of your eyes. Okay, so another example, like a cell biologist, right? You can put your slide under the microscope, and if you have no concept, right, of, right, what is the nucleus, right? What is the cell wall, right? What are the different parts of a cell? And you just look at it, it's like, oh, that's pretty. I mean, cells are pretty, right, generally. That's pretty. Oh, there's something moving there. There's some red and some green, and you have no idea, right? You need to learn the concepts first. That's the point I'm making. Or radiologist, you do your x-ray, you do your CT scan, you look at it, oh, that's the liver. No, maybe it's the gallbladder. And there's a little chunk of something there. Is that cancer? Like we have no idea. The radiologist can look at it in a minute and immediately know everything that's there, right? Because they've learned the framework. Okay, is that clear? Same with consciousness, okay? So becoming an expert observer of your own mind here, not other people's minds, but it requires learning and then observation, right? Then more learning, then more observation, right? Becoming an expert, it takes this process where you're kind of revolving, right, around kind of doing basically traditional, we could say book learning in a way, right? That's what we do in a Buddhist education. You learn about consciousness. Yeah. So you do some kind of book learning, again, with analysis, with questioning, with debating, right? But then you observe, right? And then you do more learning. Oh, is what I observed when I actually went to go practice, went to go meditate, went to go contemplate, is that similar to what this expert from 500 years ago said in his text that he wrote? Is there some difference? Why would there be a difference? Am I not seeing quite what they intended me to see? Right? So you have to first have the experience to be able to check, and then you can read the text and go back and have an experience, right? Making sense? Okay. Okay. So, oh my gosh, time is, whew, wow. Time is really flying. Okay. I'm gonna skip this. I think there's not enough time to go through everything. But again, like I said, I can send this in the chat for you to read later, and then put it on our website so you can find it there later. Okay, I'm gonna skip that. Okay, what is consciousness? This is really what we came here for, right? Okay. That was important, but we can't do everything. I'm taking too long. Okay. What is consciousness? And why is there this weird picture of, like, it looks like an airplane hangar or something? I don't know what it is. Well, it was just a stock photo that was in this template. Okay, fine. But at the same time, it's relevant. It actually is relevant. Why? Because consciousness is something which is always created in the aspect of another object. Right? There is no consciousness on its own, which is not apprehending some object or having some object appearing in the space of the consciousness. So you could put any image there and it would be representing your consciousness. Because consciousness is, no matter what you see, no matter what you turn your attention to, see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or think, now we're bringing in mental consciousness, think, your consciousness is actually arising in the form of that object. Right? Consciousness does not have any form on its own. It arises in the form of the object with which it's engaged. Okay, so now let's try and give a definition of it. Definition of consciousness. Something whose basic entity is experiential, which is clear and aware. Okay, and then some of the textbooks that we use have just a shortened version, just two terms, clarity and awareness. Clarity and awareness. Clarity refers to the fact that objects can appear in the space of consciousness. Now, think of a mirror, okay? Can objects appear and be reflected in a mirror? Yeah, of course, that's what the purpose of a mirror is to reflect the thing in front of it. Now, again, there's a difference here because consciousness is not only visual. Don't get that wrong idea. We're talking about all types of experience. So we have, again, the five senses, and then our mental consciousness, the thinker, the emoter, right? The one that emotes, the one that thinks, the one that has concepts. That's all mental. The one that analyzes, that does math problems, right? That's not your five sense consciousnesses, okay? So that's one difference between mind and a mirror, but there's a similarity there, right? It reflects things. That's actually similar between a mind and a mirror. The thing that makes consciousness different then is that it has this other quality, awareness. It knows objects. A mirror can reflect objects, it cannot know them. Now, whether or not computers or some hypothetical AI or computer or robot in the future, I don't know. Okay, I just don't know. But this is what makes consciousness a unique entity in our universe. Objects can appear within it, be reflected by it. and it knows them. There's this knowing quality of your consciousness. Now, this is something that takes time to get familiar with, this notion, this idea of this definition, right? Like I said, we have to create the framework. So listen to the words, think about what they might mean, and then take time meditating. Just turning your attention inward. Just do a 180, flipping around, not looking at the outside world, not going to the future, not going to your worries, not going to your expectations, not going to your rumination of the past, right? And just observe this consciousness and try and understand, try and see, observing, right? Seeing directly, not with your eyes, but seeing in your experience, this clarity awareness. And you can do it when the mind, if you get distracted towards the visual, towards the sound object, just let that become your meditation. It's still consciousness. You're still watching consciousness, right? So you can still, so this is called mindfulness of mind, right? There's mindfulness is, again, it's a broad practice. It has a lot of things we talked about in pop culture so much, which is great, but it's the way it's talked about is a limited form of it, or sort of one subset. So mindfulness of mind means just allowing yourself to observe the right moment by moment changing within your mind, changes within your mind, and with this conceptual understanding, this understanding of what's going on. Okay, so we talked about this just briefly, but there are 6 consciousnesses: visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, mental, or eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and then the mind consciousness. So it's kind of funny, right? What do you mean the mind? Like we started off saying mind, consciousness are equivalent, right? Basically interchangeable. So now you're saying there's mental mind. Yeah, well, there is, because there are different domains of consciousness. The visual has access to sights that are colors and shapes, right? Things you can see. This auditory has access to the sounds. They don't cross over. I mean, since some people, I guess they do with synesthesia, but generally they don't. And then you have mental consciousness, which is what really gives us access to everything. You could anything you could conceive of, in either that exists or doesn't exist, right? That's happening within your mental consciousness, right? Anything you imagine to exist, right? You can imagine a pink elephant, flying elephant, right? Okay, oh, right. Fantasy, that's what fantasy is, right? It's all using the mental consciousness. Okay, now, oh my gosh, time. I gotta figure out what's best. Okay, well, there's just 2 left. So, you know what I'll do is I'll just really quickly run through these. They're such huge topics; they could each get their own hour, or their own PhD. I mean, they could each get a lot of attention. But I'll just quickly go through, and then if there are questions about them, people can maybe bring that up in the questions. And of course, this isn't the end, right? You have more time to learn. We all have more time to go back to these issues again. So is the mind the brain? All right, so we talk, there's these kind of idea of the mind-body problem. Also, it's very similar to, or almost the same thing as, the hard problem of consciousness. So essentially, the question is, how does this thing of subjective experience arise from the physiological activity of the brain? Okay, that's how you could phrase it. So, well, but the funny thing is, the question itself is assuming that that's what's happening, isn't it? So I think we actually need to take a step back and just first figure out, well, what's the relationship between the mind and the brain? Okay, they both exist. You know, most people are convinced of that. Not everybody. Some people really don't think the mind exists even, but that's fine. But either way, I think we have these different options, right? Maybe the mind is the brain, or the mind is one with the brain. The mind is emergent from the brain. The brain is emergent from the mind. Flip it around. Possible. And then some types of consciousness are brain dependent, while others are not. Okay, so which of these, if any of them seems like it might be what the Buddhist psychology tradition would adhere to, which do you think it would be? Any hands? Oh, I saw one. I think it's in the Zoom user, right? Okay. But can you unmute? You have to like go up to the sorry. Yeah, sorry. I think I must be able to change that to allow people to unmute them.
I just
Okay.
unmuted it.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
I can.
So,
I would say that the latter is the Buddhist, would be the Buddhist idea.
Good. Very good. So the latter is the Buddhist idea, but I would say because of that, if we could use the language of number 3, the latter meaning number 5, right? We could use the language of number 3 as well. And we could say some types of consciousness are emergent from the brain. That's perfectly fine to say. What types of consciousness? Well, we just went through the visual, the auditory, the olfactory. Those, of course, are dependent on the brain, right? And for us, they're dependent on a human brain. For a cat, they're dependent on the cat brain. For a dog brain, right? They emerge from the brain. Now, emergent from the brain, though, doesn't mean that, right, there's necessarily a one-to-one, and it doesn't mean that the mind can not exist without a brain. Okay, and that's why number 5 is really the more accurate way of thinking about it. And that's, again, something that I don't expect everyone to just believe. It's very, it takes quite a bit of learning about just different like different types of meditation, essentially, and how they can sort of transcend, essentially, you could say, transcend the physical world. But also it leads to the very next question, which is where we'll close. We will close with this. Where does consciousness come from? So if we do this analysis as well, then we sort of have to come to accept that, if we do this analysis and come to the conclusion that the Buddha did, or that Buddhist scholars often do, then we would conclude that there exists mind that sort of, when the brain is there, the mind kind of starts to emerge from the brain that's there. But there's a subtler mind that came before the brain was created, right, of this life, right? That's what establishes the possibility of rebirth, of past lives, of future lives. So just read what's here. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he often makes this point, especially when meeting with scientists and the meetings he has called the part of the Mind and Life conferences, etc. So he makes this point. It's a very good point. A sperm and ovum can both meet, right? And even if the sperm and ovum both meet, it's not definite that a zygote will form. Okay, well, what does that imply? That there's some third condition. There's some third condition. Okay. Well, what is it? Okay, well, that's for us to keep as a question. A possibility that would be a continuity of consciousness that comes from a prior life. And just to point out, when we talk about consciousness, one of the things that's challenging about it is that it has different parts. It has different aspects. And the parts are not like the things we're used to, which are physically extended in space. And you can take apart, take my hand and you can take apart the 5 fingers and the joints and the knuckles and the palm and the veins and the bones. You can't just take apart consciousness in that way. But it is something which exists because of a continuity over time, a continuum, right? So if you just had a single instant of consciousness is there for one single moment, one split moment, right? Shorter than a second, just one moment. It wouldn't be able to actually experience something. I mean, it wouldn't be able to really ascertain it, right? There's just not enough time to process. So of course we need time, right? So there has to be at least, and I think the actual time length is about 10 milliseconds, what I remember of studies, that, there has to be that percept, right, or stimulus present for about at least 10 milliseconds in order for someone to register it, right? So consciousness necessarily is something that exists in a temporal, time-based continuum. Okay, so that's then, right, this comes back to the question, well, where does it come from? Well, if we trace back our consciousness, meaning your experiences, right? You're here today, you woke up this morning, tracing back your experience from this morning, getting out of bed, then being in dreams, falling asleep at night, going through the course of yesterday's activities, right? Waking up yesterday morning, going back day by day, month by month, year by year, decade by decade. Eventually you get to what? Well, the newborn infant. Okay, we'll trace that back. Was the consciousness of the newborn infant created just the moment that the head came out of the womb? Pretty unlikely. You know, we don't want to discard it, but think about it, okay? And so that will be where we'll have to end it because of time. But if anyone wants to stay on for Q&A or to listen to other people's questions, then I'm happy to. But I'll pass it back just to our gracious host, Norbula, so he can just make the kind of closing. But then I'll still be here. I just want to respect that the announcement was for 1 hour. If people want to have to leave or want to leave, this will be a place you can do that. But I will continue if there are questions or discussion people want to go into. And again, just like we started with the motivation, we'll do it just very quickly, and then kind of your own space of reflection. We'll do a dedication. So what this does is it takes that positive action, right, that we made positive through our motivation and through our good intention to benefit others. And now we actually just kind of put some extra force behind it to kind of send it off to really benefit all living beings. So kind of think in that way, that you're kind of, you could even, imagine that you're literally like emanating light out of your body, out of your heart, that's going to touch all living beings. And that's how you're offering them, right? Your time, your energy that you put into this 1 hour session. So we'll do just a minute in silence for that. Over.
Thank you so much, Venerable Donyo. And thank you for joining this wonderful, wonderful Buddhist Psychology 101 class. And there'll be another 7 more weeks of this wonderful teachings. Please join us next week at the same time. Geshe-ma will be teaching how to be happy in an unhappy mind. Once again, if anyone would like to make a donation to Force of Wisdom, I will put the link in the chat box. I'll turn that back over to Venerable Donyo now for question and answer.
Thank you, Nobula. Very kind of you. And
I'm kind of a little curious about concepts of sense consciousness versus mind consciousness a little bit. I did a discussion about consciousness a couple weeks back, and it was definitely one of the more interesting ones. And at first it was harder for me to wrap my brain around. So I was kind of curious if maybe you could go a little bit into how sense consciousness and mind consciousness work together and work separately, possibly.
Sure. Okay, so the basic idea here is that our experiences as human beings, right, are they're sectioned out into different domains of object, okay? So a consciousness arises when 3 conditions are present. It can't arise without 3. The 3 are present. It can't help but arise, okay? So what are the 3? There's a condition of an observed object, right? A condition of a prior moment of consciousness, and the condition of the sensing modality, okay? The modality, right? So as long as you have the working modality, right? You're not blind, you're not deaf, you have working, sense faculties and systems of perception. And as long as there's some object there, okay, that's 2 conditions. And then as long as there is a prior consciousness, right? Then that can be enough for the moment of perception to arise. So when you have a visual object, your visual consciousness can arise. When you have a when you have an auditory object, your hearing consciousness can arise. When you have a sound, right? So it's just the fact. It's just the fact of experience, right? The fact of experience that we don't see sounds. Now, I'm not talking about waveforms and visualizing things, right? Again, that's sort of a separate kind of analysis. I'm talking about the direct experience, the subjective experience. We don't see sounds. They don't have shape and color. We don't hear shapes and colors, right? We don't hear smells. That's its own domain. Smell is the olfactory consciousness. The mental consciousness is also its own domain, but it can access everything else. It's just in a different way, right? It's not doing it directly. It's doing it through concepts, through the medium of some kind of symbolic imagery, mental imagery, right? A world model, okay? So the mental consciousness, you can, right, see something and then immediately go, right? See the pen, I mean, you think I want to write something, look at the table, you see the pen, you think there's a pen. That's what I want, right? So it's happening very fast and they're interacting. So you first had the wish to write, that caused you to move your, eyes, you move your head around to look around and look for a pen, right? You had the visual consciousness of a pen. You pick it up and you go, oh, this is the pen. That's mental consciousness again. So immediately, there's the visual consciousness, immediately seeing, because we're so well trained, a newborn baby wouldn't be able to do this. An animal wouldn't be able to do this, right? Most animals. We're well trained, right? I mean, it has to do with developmental psychology. When we talk about the way that the mental consciousness works together with the sense consciousnesses, it's something that develops over time as you get more familiar with terms and their meanings. But essentially, the mental consciousness is very active and it's very ready to jump in at any time, right? And then, of course, it jumps in. So then we have a mental consciousness of there's a pen. And then if we lose it and we go, oh, what do you have a memory? Oh, I had this pen. It was in my book. It was in my bag. It was in my pocket. It's not there anymore. Where did I leave it? You have a memory, right? So you can have a memory of something that's not even existent anymore. You can have a mental consciousness that's occurring simultaneously with the visual consciousness. And then that is often where the storytelling and the projections that create our suffering comes in. Oh, this pen it's so beautiful. It's writes so nicely. My favorite person in the world gave it to me. My teacher gave it to me. My best friend gave it to me. You cherish it. Attachment. You don't want to lose it, right? You value it above other pens, above other things. Okay, that's happening all in the mental consciousness, right? But in dependence on having a visual perception. Now it's funny. I'll just give you a quick antidote. Antidote is something that will come next week. An anecdote. Sorry. So this is funny, right? This harkens back to what I was saying about how it's really important to actually analyze everything that's everything that you're taught, right? But especially in this context, and that you might go in with some basic, if not, you don't want to call it faith, just some basic acceptance of, okay, this makes enough sense. The Buddha said it. I guess it's probably right. I'll take it on, as a basic belief. But when you actually analyze more and more and more, you might not believe it anymore. So this is one of those things. Now, I'm actually, I'm in the 8th year of our study program here, a 25-year program in Sera, and we have our study sessions before exams, right? You get together with your classmates. We had about 10 classmates together. We're going through this text, and this text had this very question in it. And it actually had, right, the kind of, a philosophical opponent was raising this as a question, as a qualm, right? Saying, no, actually, it's not that there are 6 different consciousnesses. It's just that there's only the mind, just mental consciousness, just mind, mental consciousness. And yeah, because there are different modalities, different sensing modalities, then, the mental consciousness sort of goes into that avenue, and it it just experiences what's there in front of that sensing faculty. Okay, so we had this as our exam question that we had to prepare, and we were discussing, and we had to understand, well, what is the proof against this? What is the proof that proves there actually are 6 different consciousnesses? And my friend was explaining, and he was like, I actually think it's not 6 different ones. I think it's actually just that there is one. And then the rest of us, right? There were 10 of us there. All of us were stumped, and we're like, wait a minute, how can I actually prove? None of us could really, give a real definitive proof that shows that they're different, right? But anyway, the text that we used, that we were going through, gives this as the reason. So basically, what I said before is it would basically be like nonstop synesthesia, you could say, right? If there was really one, and it was kind of just all blending together. It wouldn't be these like distinct domains of experience. That's the basic point. But the text also talks about how, then the problem would be that you would be able to directly see, like with your sensory experience, directly see, right, things in the future, things in the past, or these things, like I said, that you only know through inference. Why? Well, because your mental consciousness can. I mean, seeing the future, meaning think about the future and think about the past, memories, right? Memories and thinking about the future. So if it was all mental consciousness and just kind of arising in relation to different modalities, then those should also be able to see the same set of objects, right? That's the essential argument. I'm not entirely sure it's all that like impactful in terms of your spiritual development and practice, like to like really definitively believe that's the case. Although I would say, just in terms of generating awareness and mindfulness of your own mental states, you want to make sure that you're spending time to be mindful of like each realm of experience individually, like being mindful of visual consciousness, being mindful of the ear auditory consciousness, the tactile consciousness, the mental consciousness. So that's the only place where I could see it being really impactful on your like meditation, so to speak.
Yeah, well, to kind of like follow up with something in your explanation, it was brought up in the discussion I had where somebody gave an example of like, let's say a Helen Keller like experience where the human can't, doesn't have sight, doesn't have the ability to speak, and let's say might be some sort of paraplegic who doesn't have, hands or something. Like, and that was sort of a question more of like, how do you tell if a person like that has consciousness? Do we just assume and then work from like, do we just assume and then work from that direction and go forward and use a sense of empathy? Or are there like a set of tools that can be used to sort of determine a situation like that if there is a mental consciousness, even though there might not be a sign of sense consciousness?
Right. Well, there's not anything in what I've studied so far that really talks about that in much detail. I think there is a text that talks about just in general how to prove that other beings are conscious, right? Have consciousness, but I haven't studied it yet. But so I don't know. I would say that definitely the go-to position would be to default to empathy and assume that if someone was born, from a human mother and, basically has the human body and just lacks all sense modality, that they would have consciousness, and unless their heart, right, unless they went brain dead or their heart stopped.